Amen. Thank you for that very thankful anthem today. That was beautiful. We do have so much to be thankful for on this day, and we remember that now as we prepare to hear our scripture reading. It does come from, it comes from the 103rd Psalm, verses 1 through 5, and I'm reading from the King James Version of the Bible. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless his holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits, who forgiveth all thine iniquities, who healeth all thy diseases, who redeemeth thy life from destruction, who crowneth thee with loving kindness and tender mercies, who satisfieth thy mouth with good things, so that thy youth is renewed like the eagles. And God add his blessing for the reading of this word. Well, let me warn you right off on this Thanksgiving Sunday that I am not going to be giving thanks today for the great gifts that God has given us. We talk a lot about them, and we've even sung about them today. For the beauty of the earth, the glory of the skies, for the love which from its birth over and around us lies. These are grand gifts, and they are important, and certainly we are thankful for them. But today I would like you to join me in thinking small. Thinking about God's tender mercies. I just noticed an example of this. And it actually has to do with our beautiful cornucopia today, which is a great gift. And it's such a wonderful tradition. And there's so much meaning behind it because it is in memory of these wonderful sisters who raised such wonderful families and who made an impact, especially here at this church. And so it is a big thing to be thankful for. But as I was looking at it, I noticed that someone had a great idea of putting one piece of broccoli there in the cornucopia. And it's been a long time since I've seen a piece of broccoli in a cornucopia. And it's my favorite vegetable. And so to be able to see it there on the cornucopia, that is something that brings me a lot of joy and a lot of gratitude. Not a big thing, not the memory of those who gave so much and did so much, but just a little connection with someone else, a little smile brought to my face, one of God's tender mercies. Now, I first heard of this phrase, tender mercies, back in the 80s with the movie by the same title, Tender Mercies. It was about a guy named Max Sledge, who was played by Robert Duvall, who did win the Academy Award for his performance in that movie. Max Sledge had made a lot of mistakes in his life. He had alienated everyone he had ever known. But in the course of the movie, we see him struggling to put his life back together again. And one of the themes of this movie was gratitude. Gratitude for all that we are given. Gratitude for the great things, but gratitude also for the simple things. The little gestures. God's tender mercies. Well, it wasn't long after seeing this movie that my father preached a sermon about tender mercies. And in that, I learned that this does come from the Psalms, but only from the King James Version, if you want to see it there. Now, 150 times in the Psalms, the psalmist mentions and gives thanks for the grand gift of God, the great gift of God, God's love and God's forgiveness. And on through 150 times throughout the Psalms it says that. But then you will find these phrases where instead of giving thanks for this one great gift that God gives us, His love, His grace, and His forgiveness, all of them wrapped into one, the psalmist gives thanks for God's tender mercies. You'll only find it there 10 times in the chapter. Tender mercies, plural. What are these tender mercies? Well, the word apparently refers to the multitude of times in our lives when we give, when we receive little gifts of compassion and joy, when we serve as God's delivery men and women, bringing wonderful little gifts to one another. So that's what I'm holding up for you today. God's tender mercies. I believe we all have a storehouse of them in our minds, in our memories. And to help you to think about yours, I want to unpack a few of mine in just a moment. But they are so important, these tender mercies. They are like little chinks in the armor of a cold world through which God's love brightly shines. Here's one I read some time ago. I love this illustration, this story. It goes back almost 100 years ago. That's when the story begins, when a shy young man named Stryker Flagg took his girlfriend Mary out for a buggy ride, and the shy young man, in the course of that ride, managed to propose to Mary. He gave to her a diamond ring with a diamond in it that was so small you could barely see it, yet was so large that it cost all the money that he had. Well, they were married, and they lived on a farm together for many years. They grew old together, but soon after they were married, not long at all after they were married, Mary lost that engagement ring. And she looked all over for it. She couldn't find it, so finally giving up. Well, they did grow old together on that farm. Stryker Flagg eventually passed away, and Mary sold the farm, and she moved away, and it went through several changes of ownership until finally the new owner, Edie Seligson, was digging in the garden after a hard rain, and she spotted a little bit of gold, and she uncovered it and washed it and found a ring there, and in the ring was inscribed SF to MP with the date. She did a little investigating, talking to neighbors, making phone calls. She determined that it must belong to one of the former owners of the house, Mary Flagg. She called some more, and she found out that Mary was living in a nursing home not far away. And so she went to visit her. They got acquainted, and then at one point she told Mary what she had found, and she brought out the ring. And she placed it back on Mary's finger after 55 years of being lost. One of God's tender mercies. And how often this is the way these tender mercies come to us. Someone brings us something that we have lost. Someone gives us just that exact thing we need. Well, I want you to think again about your tender mercies in your life. And here are a few of mine from my collection to perhaps jog your memory as well. Some tender mercies are simply acts of kindness and connection. They're simply moments when someone shows us that we are loved or we feel connected in a powerful way to them. Well, I was 12 years old, and I was visiting my grandparents in Gladewater, Texas, just about an hour west of here. Now, most of my visits there in Gladewater were spent around the house. My mom and grandmother would talk, and I would follow my grandfather around, and he would show me all the treasures that he had collected throughout his life. Just the kind of thing a 12-year-old would be interested in, adding machines that no longer worked, and old clocks, and other things like that were of great interest to me. My grandfather also introduced me to one of the best shows ever, Gunsmoke. And so I got to know Matt Dillon, Festus and Chester, all the rest. But one day when I was 12 and we were visiting, my grandfather had a project that he wanted to do at a shop that he owned in downtown Gladewater. So off we went together, and I was so proud. I'm 12 years old now, clearly old enough to help my grandfather with something. And it was actually a pretty big job. I know I was helpful at a few times when an extra pair of hands was needed, but I also know, looking back and from experience now, how helpful that 12-year-old boys generally are with things. And actually, they usually have a lot more enthusiasm than ability, and I'm sure that that was the case with me. But my grandfather was so kind to me in those moments, the hours we spent together, and I was so proud when we were finished. So proud to be able to help him, so proud to have done a job with him and experienced him in that way. I felt like I had given my grandfather something after years and years of him giving to me, but now I look back at it and I know that we were in those hours together, both of us giving and receiving not great gifts, but some of God's tender mercies. those memories I cherish. And actually, that was the beginning of several summers where I would come, and now old enough to help, he always seemed to have a project for me to help with until finally he was too old to do them himself. And the memory of all those times that I carry with me today, the memories of my grandfather and being able to experience him in that particular way, I certainly consider those memories God's tender mercies for me. That's often the way it is. These tender mercies connect us to one another, and sometimes they come so unexpectedly. They come at just the moment when they are needed. And they help us in our moment of need. I remember one little incident that really amounts to just about nothing, but I've cherished it. Cherished this memory. It actually took place 11 and a half years ago, just a couple of months before we came here to Kings Highway Christian Church. We were on a family reunion up in Colorado with the Cook family. So it was the Bryces and the Cooks and the Elliots and the Lamberts, all of us there together, my wife's whole family, my whole family there together. And it was wonderful. We were having a wonderful time together, but really now as I look back at it, it's all a happy blur, except for one moment. We were in a cabin. My wife and I were in one of the cabins with her mother, Nancy, who many of you know. And the only other person there was our little boy, who at that time was 2 years old. And he was playing with his toys on the floor, and we were at the dining room table talking to Nancy, one of us on either side of her. And at one point in the conversation, as she's talking about her granddaughter, Laura, and all the health concerns that Laura has had through the years, she began to cry. And she was crying, and Leslie was holding her hand, and I said a few things of comfort, I hoped. But then finally, we didn't have much else. We knew what to say to her, and there she was crying, and us with our tongues tied a little bit about what to say next. And in that moment, with her tears and with our concerns, up pops two little hands with a box of Kleenex. And we'll put the Kleenex on the table. You see, if he had seen his grandmother crying, and he certainly didn't know what to say, he could barely talk. But he knew that when people cried, they liked Kleenex. And so he went off, unseen, to the bathroom, and got the box, and brought it back in, and put it on the table, and we all looked down at him, and he had such a look of concern on his face, not being used to seeing the adults he loved in his life crying. And he looked so concerned, and with that little gesture of Kleenex, suddenly Nancy's tears turned to gratitude, to joy, and even a few bits of laughter, as Will was suddenly and unexpectedly enfolded in the arms of his grandmother, hugging him, kissing him, as we laughed together and as she gave thanks to her grandchild for giving her one of God's tender mercies. Well, so many of these tender mercies are a bit yellow with age. We look back and remember them, but I'm blessed that I don't have to look back far. So many tender mercies in my life, from my beautiful wife, from my children, from my parents and brothers and sisters and nieces and nephews, all of them together, from friends that are longtime friends and new friends, but I never encounter more tender mercies than I experience here in my ministry at this church. How many times I have seen you provide some act of comfort just when it was needed. Provide some act of kindness just when someone was feeling low. Provided some words of acceptance when somebody was standing at the margins looking in and wondering if they would be welcome. Countless little tender mercies that because of my position here I have been privileged to witness. And so many tender mercies given freely to me. countless ways you have shown me these beautiful, tender mercies. And so here on this Thanksgiving week, on this first day of a Thanksgiving week, let me begin by saying thank you. Thank you for the tender mercies you show to one another, for I am inspired by them. And thank you for the tender mercies you have shown to me. Tender mercies. They can be memories from long ago. They can be something we can open our eyes to and can see every day. This Thanksgiving season, I want you to be aware of this. I want you to go from this place dusting off the album that contains the tender mercies that you have experienced. And if this week you are with friends or family around the Thanksgiving table, perhaps you will share a few of these tender mercies. For as the psalmist says, God crowneth thee with loving kindness and with tender mercies. Let us bow in prayer. Loving God, for the joy of human love, brother, sister, parent, child, friends on earth and friends above, for all gentle thoughts and mild, Lord of all, to thee we raise this our prayer of grateful praise. In Jesus' name.